This is an IWP media production, brought to you by the Institute of World Politics, the independent accredited graduate school empowering the next generation of national security, intelligence, and international affairs experts. Learn from top scholar practitioners and acquire invaluable skills to propel your career. For more information, visit iwp.edu.
Hi, welcome to IWP's podcast. I am Professor John Tsagronis, Professor of Statecraft and National Security Affairs at IWP, and I'd like to welcome you, Kelley, Professor DeConciliis, Adjunct Professor at IWP, a wonderful friend of mine, and with a very interesting background. Kelley, you might not know, but there's a television series on Netflix, I believe it is, or Paramount, called The LIONESS. And as I watched it, I immediately thought of you. Given your background, if you would explain to everyone what a lioness is and how I would come to the conclusion that you are a lioness.
Oh my gosh, going with the hard-hitting questions right off the bat. Well, first, John, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. I feel like we would be doing the audience a disservice, though, if we didn't really talk about how we first met. You knew I was going to bring it up, BFF.
Yeah, okay, all right.
So for those of you that happen to be listening, I was getting a tour of the beautiful building and company buildings within the IWP campus, and going around and meeting professors and all the different heads of states. And as the vice chairman of the board of IWP, I go into your office to meet with you. And there was a bunch of folks there, and you go to put it out your hand, and you go, "Oh, it's so nice to meet you. Are you an intern here?" And that was when we became BFFs, right?
Yeah, it is. And to my credit, I was told that I was going to be meeting with an intern before you. You can imagine my shock when I realized you were not an intern, but when I understood what your background was, and we became wonderful friends from that moment on.
It is true. And you made a soccer mom in her 40s very happy,
well,
so you made my day. So I had to at least, you knew I was going to get you on that.
I'm sure you plan to do so. Tell me about the lioness. Tell me why I would think that you were a lioness.
Okay. Well, I think that show, by the way, when I talk to people about what it's like with certain tradecraft, if you will, and that's just a term that they use in the spy world a lot for different actions, covert.
Were you a spy?
I was not a spy, I can tell you that. Okay. But if anyone tells you they're a spy, then they're
probably not.
They're probably not, just as a sidebar. But Lioness, which is on Paramount Plus with Zoe Zaldana, it's an amazing program. It's actually, I have a class that I'm going to be teaching at IWP this fall, and one of the pieces is I'm asking all my students to actually watch the series, because I said it's one of the most realistic series on what it's like to actually be a female operator, but someone who's also a mom and a wife. And when you come back from the field, and by the field I mean you are in war zones, you are in kinetic environments, you're being deployed multiple times, and you are facing adversaries, and you're doing counterintelligence and counterterrorism. And so there's a lot of different pieces that go into that. And it's something that I'm really passionate about, but how do you make it all work and still be a normal, functioning human being at the end of the day? I think, though, John, that's the beauty, though, of women in national security, right? I mean, to be able to handle that. So that's one of the things that I have told people. I had amazing mentors in my career very early on. And so being part of IWP and becoming on the faculty, one of the big things is I want to give back. I want to give back to that next generation of security professionals, whether it's you're going to be a case officer, a foreign service officer, you're going to be an analyst, a diplomat, a soldier. I want to be able to provide what happens in the field. It necessarily doesn't always translate when you're all the way high up in the ranks as a diplomat or doing policy. I tell the students, if you're in the field, you need to understand what a falafel tastes like around the corner. You need to be able to feel the sand. You need to know the seasons. You need to know in certain areas where you're going, it's 180 degrees in the shade. And so I feel like when you have that sense of grounding, in these environments, you're able to make better informed decisions, policies, and be able to provide the correct statecraft to the right stakeholders if you understand the actual environment.
Can you describe some of the experiences you've had in the field that have brought you to this recognition of women in national security and the field in general?
Sure. So the field that I have been in and was in for quite some time, it's called exfiltration. There are no real classes on exfiltration. It was something that I learned through experience. There's no real school that you can go to. It's all really on the ground training. And just for those that may not understand exfiltration, what does that mean? It's really a fancy way of saying getting people out of bad places. So if you think of it, you have, evacuations, which are very public, like for example, the Japan tsunami in 2011. I was working with Defense Health Agency, which is the military health arm of DOD, Department of Defense at the time. And I remember getting a call saying, Kelley, you need to get over here immediately. Didn't know what was going on. It was 5 o'clock on a Friday, I believe. And I walk in, and it was pretty much so half a C-SPAN sitting in a room. And they go, we have a problem. We have 4 MTFs, military treatment facilities, and they're all going down from a power standpoint. So we had all of these patients on all these monitors with all of this patient data on their electronic medical records that we had to back up, move the patients and the staff, and get them to a different facility. Now, some might think that might be easy, 4 different hospitals, over 400 patients. On any other day, probably wouldn't be too bad. All the runways were flooded. There were no planes that we could use at the time. And so I remember seeing on the news a FedEx cargo plane. And so I remember contacting a contact at FedEx, and I said, I need to borrow your plane. And
Sure,
so,
here are the keys.
Right. And so dumping out the plane, putting patients in, moving them to a different facility. I believe it was Tripler in Hawaii, which is an Army facility. But then again, it becomes, John, like a logistics Rubik's Cube. So now you've flooded another installation with patients and staff. They can't handle these people. So again, it's evacuation, it's public, you're seeing what's going on. So you're still having to move people to different places. So that's an evacuation. And then we'll get to exfil in a second. And then you have, extraction. And there's movies on it, there's shows on it. Extraction is more what we call it in the field, more like a hot extraction. So, for example, if you're in Burkina Faso, as an example, I had an experience where we had, I believe it was about 38 expats sitting in a hotel with 1 security guard with 0 bullets. And I get a call saying, Kelley, we're in trouble. We have rebels, storming the compound any minute. I said, okay. What are your exits? Who do you have on the ground? They said, we have no firepower. What should we do? And it wasn't enough time necessarily to kind of go in as an exfil and do it quickly and quietly. And so what we call that is a hot extraction, and where you're typically getting aircraft in to hover over a building, you're extracting personnel out. There's usually gunfire sometimes. It's very kinetic. It can be hostile and very engaging with the adversaries. And so all of that happened in that case, for example. No one was harmed, luckily. But it was almost like Hotel Rwanda. That's the best way to describe it. If you get to hear my classes, I always kind of reference movies, because Hollywood and the intelligence community are woven very closely together.
Yes.
As you know. So getting back to an exfil. So getting people out quickly and quietly. Well, I would love to tell you all of my exfils. In the words of the movie Argo, if you wanted an audience, you should have joined the circus, right? So the exfil world is very different. Right? So your job is to go in and get assets from the United States of America and get assets out of foreign countries. And this is a very, very delicate process. Usually it's a very methodical process, and so there's time that's taken to be able to figure out different steps on getting, a person or people out. I can probably give the best example, which is more public, because most of the things that I do are not public, and that's fine, is probably Afghanistan. And we can jump into that if you'd like.
Yeah, well, I want to ask you, how did
Sure.
you get into this field to begin with? I mean, this is not something that a recent graduate at IWP, for example, is going to aspire to get into the world of extraction, exfiltration, and evacuation.
That's a great question. I get asked that a lot. I wish I had this really great story of, yes, like I took this class and then I got into this program. That's not how it went at all. I graduated from Catholic University of America. My background was in neuropsychology, the study of brain, body, and human behavior. I ended up working at a startup at the time here in the Washington, D.C. area at a hospital, Washington Hospital Center. And I worked in the emergency room in emergency preparedness disaster response. And this was right after 9/11. And so one of the pieces we were getting from Homeland Security was we had that Al-Qaeda was targeting hospitals, specifically in the DC area. And from the adversarial side, and I can always look objectively and say, wow, that's really strong of them to think that way. And it was very smart. Why take out a subway when you can take out the actual institution that's going to take care of them? So create a bomb, right, in a subway, metro, but then take out all of the hospitals so there's no help, and then that creates panic. Terrorists, they thrive on panic, right? They want us to be fearful. I think that was obviously the whole goal of 9/11, to always wonder, is a plane going to go into a building, right? And so one of the things that I did, and it was still to this day one of my favorite jobs, and I was just a kid, is that I got to recreate bioterrorist attacks in a makeshift hospital at DC General. They had shut it down. There was a jail there, so that was interesting. So literally I'm scrubbing floors, getting it ready as an actual hospital to do disaster drills, and prisoners in handcuffs are walking by. True story. So that was literally one of my first jobs. When we started the drills, we brought in, I needed students, right? I needed to have actors. We couldn't pay for actors. I went over to Georgetown Hospital. I said, can I borrow some of your med students and you can give them continuing, education credits? And so they said, yeah, sure, no problem. And they took their ER students, brought them over. I worked with Walter Reed, which it was called at the time, and had their makeup and moulage department come over and help me out. And so we had people with, third-degree burns, bomb, chemical. I really wanted to get our first responders, and I don't mean necessarily EMS and fire. I mean the first responders that are in the hospital, right? Because I think a lot of people think of the FBI. Well, yes, FBI comes in, but not on first sight and first impact. It's the hospital staff that's going to see all of these people. And so my job was to test the hospital staff to see where their stressors were, and then we would focus on the areas of concern. So candidly, we thought the big stressors would be inside the hospital in the brick and mortar. John, that was not the case. It was actually outside the hospital when the clinicians actually had to triage. Yep. Yeah. And any other day, they would have been a green patient or a yellow, be able to make it. We would have patients that were yellow, but we would actually put them as red or black. And red being critical, black being, they've expired, and move on to the next person. And so I had all of this data coming in from different sources. I didn't have a way to put it together. So long story short, these two doctors at Washington Hospital Center had created this algorithm and software to pull all the data together from various disparate systems. I was so impressed by it that I ended up going to work for them, still at Washington Hospital Center, but it was in a trailer out back. So when people think of startups, they think of Facebook. I was like, no, I was in a trailer, out back outside of the hospital. And it was me and a handful of nerds, and we were working on robotics, gesture recognition, and neurosurgery ORs.
Oh,
and
wow.
we had all different types of companies that very interested, but the one that was really, really interested was a little small software company called Microsoft.
Oh, the little small one. Oh,
Just
yes.
very tiny. And if you can imagine, I think I was 26 at the time, and at this small startup, and then being thrust in and acquired into Microsoft, this behemoth of an engine. But what was really neat about the whole transaction is that we ended up going into an R&D, or research and development group, under the Bill Gates side. So Bill G had about 5 different groups that he really focused on, and so that's where we got to do a lot of research and development and working with military health.
Wow.
And so that was really how I kind of parlayed into the military health arena. And then over a course of a decade, worked in various roles, as a contractor within the Defense Health Agency. And that, John, to answer your question, that was the most long-winded answer ever, but that's where I got into evacuations, and then slowly kind of made a name for myself on Kelley's the person you call when everyone else says no. And the best one I can give, with not a ton of details, but the best one I can give is I got a call from a specific agency. I don't know how they got my number. I said, I literally said, how did you get my number? And she goes, I need your help. And I have assets at this place, and it's a really awful place. And I need you to get them out. This is at the time of COVID, when all countries were locked down. This is when you couldn't get a plane to save your life. I said, okay, how many people have said no to you? She's like, 6 agencies and 9 government contractors.
Wow.
I said, okay, count me in. And so we did do a successful mission. It involved using, private planes and working with FAA. And again, like I said before, it's a logistics Rubik's Cube. Exfils are meant to be done quickly and quietly. You go in, you get your assets, you get out. And that's it. You don't typically engage with them any further. You bring them back to their safe place, and then you move on and you go on with your life. And so, for example, I would be doing an exfil, and I'd be coming back in the middle of the night in like full tactical gear, and then the next morning wake up and go drive my kids to school in my white minivan loser cruiser.
Well, I should let you know that I've had some SEER training, some survival, escape, resistance, and evasion training for some of the work I do for the Pentagon. But I have you on my call list for any exfiltration, extraction, or evacuation that I may come upon. I'm going to rely on you, and I
got you.
I know you will. Tell me a little bit about the if not the tensions or the stresses, but how do you balance the work-life challenge as a very progressive, effective woman in the field, but also a wonderful wife and mom to 3 wonderful children?
Oh, well, they are kind of cute. Well, I'll tell you this, and I tell the students this, that my first kind of knee-jerk reaction is you can't do it all.
By the way, we're going to talk about the course that you're teaching in IWP in a bit.
Oh, fantastic. Well, you can't do it all is the thing. And juggling is a good way. There is really no such thing as balance. And I tell a lot of females going into the field, and I said, it's not that you can't have it all, you just maybe can't have it all
at once.
Yeah. And you have to be okay with that. So for me, as example, I have 3 kids under 8 years old, and there's a set of twins in there. So there are certain things that I know, like for example, I'll never be the head of the PTA. I'm okay with that though. Like as long as I'm still there for all of my kids, big milestones or art fairs, and I can make it to that, I'm good. But I'm not going to be, sitting and sewing things into t-shirts, for a school rally. It's just not going to happen. What I like to do is give 100% of myself to wherever I'm at. So if I'm at work or I'm in an overseas operation, I am 100% in the game, fully focused. If I am at home or if I'm with my kids at sports games, art, whatever it is, I'm 100% engaged with them. And so that's how I like to operate. Now, that sounds great on paper, but if it's put to the test, sometimes the worlds intersect. And I've got an interesting, funny story. So my twins at the time, I think, were 2, and I had 2. So I had
2 boys.
2-year-old twin boys, and then Adeline was just born, only a few months old. And I was sleep deprived, obviously, but I really wanted to make it to the Halloween, dress up, contest. And so all the parents dressed up. So I was a dinosaur. We were the T-Rex family. And I knew that if I went to the Halloween parade, it should be fine. I got a call, hey, Kelley, we need you at the Pentagon. And I was like, okay, yes, sir. When do you need me? Like, right now.
In your dinosaur costume.
So that was the thing, though, John. I didn't have a backup. So I said, okay, got it. So I ended up going to the Pentagon and presenting a briefing specific on counterterrorism and some other topics as T-Rex.
Are there pictures of this?
Thank God, no. But again, what would be slightly embarrassing, what I learned, and I didn't learn this till much later on in life.
It's who you are.
It's who you are, right? And I try and tell women that. I said, you know, my 20s, I just grinded. I mean, I was the first one in, last one out. Really sacrificed a lot. Saw all of my friends getting married and having kids. And so the 20s, for me, I was just honed in on work. Mm-hmm. My 30s, I really played catch up. I met my husband, I had the kids all within a span of under 4 years. And then as I got into my later 30s, I really started to realize I can just be who I am. I don't have to prove myself anymore. And now, in my 40s, I really just own it. And so me walking in as T-Rex, to a briefing, it actually brought a human element, I think, to me, where people where I work probably didn't see that. They saw someone as an operator in the field and someone who was a bit rough around the edges. And so they're like, oh, Kelley, look, she's a mom and she's human. And so it ended up being a positive thing.
Have you ever attended your children's soccer game in your work camo and your kit?
Oh gosh, let's see. I have not done that, but I have brought work to their school. Okay. I sit on a nonprofit board called Paws of Honor, and what they do is they provide and cover medical costs for retired working dogs in government agencies. Mm-hmm. Something I'm really passionate about, having worked with bomb dogs for the last probably 7 years of my career. They're typically the dogs that are the first ones in, checking out the scene before we, the humans, go in for contraband or whatever it might be, IEDs. So talking about kind of giving back, I thought it would be fun to have all different types of the government come bring their dogs, whether it was a service dog from Loudoun County Police Department Special Victims Unit, they brought a Labrador, or other dogs that were just pure bomb dogs, Secret Service dogs. They all came to my kids' school. And let me tell you, John, if you ever want to win points with your kids,
bring dogs.
Just bring dogs. I'm officially known as the dog lady. So no longer Will and Wyatt and Addie's mom, I'm just the dog lady. And it's like rock star status. Yeah. So that's a good example.
Okay. And indeed, you are a rock star. Can you tell us a little bit about the course, the new course that you're introducing to IWP that I've encouraged my students to take, and I gather you've got quite an enrollment this semester, or actually, this semester. Mm-hmm. Tell us about the Fog of War course.
Oh, yeah. So I'm very excited about the class. I, first of all, thought that no one was going to join. And I told you that.
Fat chance.
And so when I found out it reached capacity once and then it reached capacity twice, so I was getting excited that people were genuinely interested. Because I think, John, for me, I have not considered myself as, in the world of academia. And I talked about this at a commencement speech I did earlier this year at my.
But in IWP, if I can interrupt,
yes, please,
you're a perfect example of the scholar practitioner. So you are intellectually curious, even though you may not be the ivory tower academic, and few of us at IWP are. But you're the perfect example of the practitioner in the field who can relate to the students not only what the theory is of exfiltration or extraction or the fog of war, but you've lived it.
Right. And I think that's an important message to show is you can read all of the books in the world and studies and white papers, but to actually live it, experience it, I want to take my experiences and give those to the students so they can learn and maybe not make the same mistakes and be able to kind of provide them with the tools in order to move forward in different scenarios.
Can you explain or identify some of the key concepts that you want to impart to the students?
Yeah, so the Fog of War, when I was trying to come up with a name, and there's a saying that I like to always say is that terrorists never sleep, but neither do soccer moms.
Right.
Right? And it is true, we don't sleep. And that's a good thing because we can go head to head with them any day of the week. The fog of war.
If any terrorists are listening, be very careful.
Be on alert. The fog of war is an interesting notion because it's a lot of looking back in the review mirror. And what I mean by that, John, is that when you have the Senate Select Committee or you have the Hill asking you questions about an event that happened, a lot of those people that are judging weren't necessarily there in that event, in that moment of time, right? And so the fog of war, you are making decisions based on your just ability to assess a situation very, very quickly. And it's typically a very high pressure kinetic situations in a war zone where you have seconds to make these choices.
Will you present students with some scenarios to help them walk through how they might respond? Or
Absolutely. I'm going to go through various scenarios that I personally have been involved with, whether it's Afghanistan, Baghdad, Erbil, parts and points in Africa, Somalia, places that are not destination places, places that are where we have had a foothold in from the U.S. side, but as a government contractor. What's really interesting is, and again, I've always been on the government contractor side, which allows me a little bit more freedom and less red tape personally, to be able to kind of do certain missions and take on certain positions and programs. And what I just want people to understand is how you navigate through that territory, how you navigate foreign lands. And so we're going to touch upon that. Also, my background is in counter-bioterrorism, and so the CBRNE with the chemical, biological, nuclear side. I'm going to have a decontamination class, and so I'm going to teach all of the students like how to actually dress in PPE in a certain amount of time, and it's all going to be with household products.
Yep.
So this is something that I taught early on within military health to certain folks that would be going, out into the field and teaching them, here's what you've got. If you have trash bags, duct tape, and some glasses, how can you make, an outfit that if you're going into a SARS location, and SARS at the time was very big years ago, or anthrax, something that's sometimes airborne, is how do you protect yourself against that? And so that's what we're going to go
So trips
through.
to Home Depot to buy the rubber gloves and
Yes,
the duct tape.
I know I'm on a list somewhere. I know they're tracking me, so hopefully they hear me now. It's just for teaching purposes. But I've always been a big believer in, and you have to put what's going on operationally into the students' hands. I remember teaching a course, you mentioned being in the SEER training. I remember teaching a course with the Seabees. And these are folks that are going and doing expeditionary, missions in very, very rural, remote areas. And so what I wanted to teach them was kind of how do you do medical care, right? If you're going into a place like Africa, for example, specific pieces in Africa, Somalia and other places, you might not necessarily be dealing with GSWs, gunshot wounds, like Baghdad. You might be dealing more with like a machete wound within a tribal community. So the care of a machete wound is very different, right? And so one of the things I would teach is how do you use tools? You're not going to have surgical instruments. And so we had cadavers at the time, and I remember it was a whole class. I started at least with a whole class of CBs. It was about 25 of them, very, very young. I think some of them were like 19. And I got a chainsaw out. I said, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to show you how to saw off, the lower ligament of a leg using a chainsaw. And as I started, we started doing the actual process, and then they don't tell you with cadavers, what you're getting. Well, the guy that had expired, he had a steel plate in his leg, so it was a disaster. Sparks flying, burning. Kids are passing out, throwing up. I mean, it was a complete and utter just
You
real
chainsawed a cadaver's
left leg, yeah. Just to show them, here's what they do have, potentially in certain areas, and here's how you would actually work this. And I think I only had 2 students left after I was done the exercise, but that's part of it, John, is you have to be able to push students to the limit, right? And you have to push people, and that's what it's about.
Fantastic. We're going to go deep now.
Okay.
All right. I want to know, and I think the audience would like to know, how did you, where were the deep parts that compelled you to get into this field, where we often say, if you love what you do, you never work a day in your life. And clearly, knowing you've never worked a day in your life. you love the work that you do. But there had to be some times when you really questioned, is this really what I want to continue to do? Can you describe some of those experiences or those moments, if any?
Yes, absolutely. And I love that we're just going right into it. We're just getting real personal. Listen, I think, to take and look under the veil, if you will, of being an individual like myself, I think you have to almost go through tragedy to understand and experience and appreciate the gifts that you're able to give, right? And by what I mean with that is that for an individual like myself who's been in the field to operate the way I do, you have to have some grit. And that's what I tell my students, right? And grit, and you have to have a moral compass and courage, but more importantly than anything above, you have to have a passion for what you do. And so, going all the way back to when I was 19 years old in college at Catholic University of America, I remember, my mom had died of a brain tumor. I lost her very suddenly. And at the time I thought, all I wanted to do was be in business and work, for American Express, travel around the world. I was in a program that, I speak Spanish and French and, in business classes. And I thought that's what I wanted. And I met a neuropsychologist that worked with my mom in helping her, in her recovery before she passed. And she really changed my life, John, truly changed my life. It gave my mom hope. And so knowing that piece and experiencing that, I said, I want to do something like that. I want to help people. And that's how it kind of started for me. And it was through trial and tribulation. And what I think is always interesting is you never should judge a book by its cover. Mm-hmm. So I think when people see me, let's be honest, candidly, they think I'm like Elle Woods from Legally Blonde. Or an intern, right? And that's okay. I get that all the time. And they think I've had this privileged life and I haven't had to do anything and everything's kind of been on a silver platter. That couldn't be farther from the truth. In college, I was as broke as you could possibly imagine. I had 3 jobs to put myself through school. So in the morning, I would go to class, and then I would drive into the city, into Georgetown. I would work at a tanning salon, and I would clean the sweat off the beds. That's what I did. Then after that, I would then go across the street to a store called Urban Outfitters, which was a clothing store, and I'd work in the fitting room folding clothes. And then after that, and this is all in one day, and I would do this, every day for an entire year. And then I would go to Capital City Brewery and be a hostess on the late night shift. And I took a semester off to be with my mom and take care of her.
Where did you grow up?
Right outside Philadelphia. But I don't have the Philly accent, which is kind of interesting because everyone else in my house is like, hey, hon, how you doing? How's it going? But there's still the Philly in me, and that's more of the grit, and we don't take anything from anyone. And I think for me, and I go into this not to be depressing, John, but to tell you that through that, I've kind of been in the gutter. I know what it's like to not have anything. I remember I had to make up an entire semester, and they're like, you're not going to graduate on time, you don't have the grades. And I just told them, I was like, watch me. Yeah. And so that's what I did. And I pushed all the classes I could together in one summer just so I could catch up with all my classmates, graduate on time. And I think something that's always been a constant is people are always doubting me and what I can do. But those are the people I want to send thank you notes to, because all the people that tell me, no, you can't, it just gives me more fire, right? To just go in and prove them wrong. I don't know if that's a healthy thing, but it's fine. It's worked for me.
It's certainly a motivation, yes.
It's a motivation, right? And so I think having that, right, and that was kind of my first entry into how do you kind of persevere? How do you have resilience? And so when I'm going into a situation like an exfil and people have to trust you almost instantaneous, right? Literally you have minutes.
Immediately and completely.
And completely. Yeah. You're saying, I'm going to have your life, I'm going to have your family's life, and I'm going to get you out of here.
And that's why I've got you in my
right? And that's not an easy task, because I can tell you some people will say, I'm not going with you. And so you have to be able to build trust quickly. And I haven't got to where I am today without having relationships formed. And that's why I think it's so important for people to have a really solid network. But my life has always been, very interesting in the sense of people, for whatever reason, like to challenge me and like to, kind of go against me at times. And what I say to people is if
bring it on,
bring it on, and you must be doing something right. I'll never forget, from a corporate standpoint, navigating the corporate waters. And I always say I thought middle school was rough with my daytime headgear and the Coke bottle glasses and the teen acne. Yeah, that has nothing on like corporate America. And I remember being at Microsoft, and just imagine I was 25, I think, at the time. I'm coming in, we just got through this acquisition, and we're like the shiny new toy. Everyone wants a piece of us. All the different agencies want us. Well, the people that were running SharePoint and that side of the house and Excel, we were taking away from their business, essentially. They weren't too happy about it. So I had a peer of mine, a colleague, but who had been in the business for about 20 years, and she had, 20, 30 years on me overall. And another peer of mine took me into my office and actually whiteboarded on a board how they were going to discredit and take me out. So Kelley, we're going to...
My goodness.
Yes. But it's okay. So I sat there quietly and I go, okay, thank you for that. And then, of course, not in front of them, but then I went into another office and totally cried my eyes out, like how... But with that said, it was great, because I was like, okay, like I got this. People are coming for me, and I need to like prepare and be set up, to have success, and know that people are going to try and take you down, but don't let that get to you. Because if I let that get to me, I don't think I would have kept going, moving forward in life, right? Mm-hmm. And so those are just a few examples, I guess. But I talk a lot, John, and I think it's important if we're going deep, of course, is... this thing called the gift of failure, right? I tell everyone, it's okay, like, if you get fired from somewhere. I think everyone should at least be fired once, just to know what it feels like. And I've been there. I remember one of my first jobs, I was selling, this was for a very brief moment of time, I was selling PET scanners, positron emission tomography. So if you've ever seen...
PET scan, sure.
PET scan. So if you've ever seen the movie Pursuit of Happiness with Will Smith, he's selling these like boxes like of machines that are like medical equipment, and he has like hundreds of them in his apartment, and no one wants to buy it. Yeah, that was kind of me in a way. And this was me kind of just trying to earn some money. So I was working in DC. They were based in Philadelphia. They asked me to come out to a rest stop like 2 hours away from my house. I go to a rest stop off of 95. I'll never forget, Roy Rogers. And John, they fired me at Roy Rogers.
They fired you at Roy Rogers. Yeah.
So you want to talk about low moments in corporate America, that would probably be it.
And you were how old?
I was 24.
24, yeah.
It was like one of my first jobs, just trying to kind of make my way. And this is before I got into the disaster emergency preparedness. But I will tell you this, though. So I come back to the hospital I was working at, Georgetown, and I'm like in tears, crying. I just got fired. I can't believe this. And one of the doctors goes, hey, there's this position over at Washington Hospital Center. To do
training.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so again, that's like a gift. That failure piece that should have been the most like humiliating experience of my life, and ended up being an amazing opportunity. I just didn't see it at the time, but it was an amazing opportunity.
It's a great story. Yesterday we had orientation at IWP, and several of the faculty were asked to inform the students how to be successful. And I basically said that there are 3 different ways to be successful. 3 different measures of success. One, academically, in an academic institution. So, read your books and assignments, deliver them on time, and write good papers. But students are here for more than just the academics. They're also here to develop themselves professionally, but also personally. And you're a wonderful mentor in all those areas. How have you used those failures, those few failures in your life, to succeed academically, professionally, and personally?
So I'll give you an example. And I've had, you said few failures. I've had a ton of failures, but that's okay. That's what makes me me, and that's all right. I'll give you one from a business standpoint, because this one like cut to the core, and it was very public. And so like I talked about evacuations being public and on center stage, this was like a public firing, essentially. I had just come back from maternity leave and I was working with a company. I had just got elected and nominated to this board of directors at a nonprofit. It was very exciting. It's about 500 of my peers at this corporate networking event, right? So my CEO takes me in the hall and the hallway at a Hyatt and fires me. And says
At the event.
At the event, John. I just become like part of this board of directors, which would be huge for any one of these companies in the mix. He didn't obviously see that. And I said, like, on what grounds? How am I getting fired? He says, well, there was a dent in your productivity. I was,
A dent?
I said, I was on maternity leave with twins. Like, are you serious? And so, again, what should have been, because he meant it to be humiliating, right? He wanted it. What he didn't realize is the whole plan kind of backfired. And so I went downstairs to get my bags, not realizing there was a cocktail hour. So then now it's like 5 o'clock, there's a cocktail hour. So it's 500 of my peers, and then they all start hearing about, and they didn't know who I was, Kelley DeConciliis, who. But I will tell you, John, everyone knew who I was by the end of the night, because I was a disaster. I mean, I was completely vulnerable. I'm like, I just got fired. I have these new babies at home. I can't believe this. And so I'll tell you, what was amazing is the power of having relationships and people actually wanting to help. And I think if you come from that place of wanting to help others in need, and that's what...
You will find that too.
Yes, you will find that too. And I remember I think it was 7 job offers in 2 days, in under 48 hours. And I remember one CEO who I was meeting with, he goes, Kelley, I got to tell you, I had about 6 people tell me like I'd be an idiot if I didn't hire you. And he goes, I've never had this happen, so if you want to come on, like, let's do it. And it was great. And again, it's one of those things where I didn't even have the confidence in myself, other people saw it in me. And I think that's just a really good story. And I tell people, we can talk all about our successes all day long, but I don't really learn from my successes, right? Like,
we learn from our failures.
Yeah, like if I could have a ball. So at home, right, my husband he played in college and in high school football, and so he's got all of his football memorabilia. I have my 8th grade library contest award that I won, and that's the only award that I have on there, and I was really excited and proud of it. But everything else, if I could put all my failures up, I would, like pink slips, those types of things, because it gives you grit. It reminds you you're human. It also is testing you too, to see what are you going to do next? How are you going to equip yourself to kind of go into battle? And does it leave you in that fight and flight? And we could get into the parasympathetic nervous system, but we won't. But I think it's something that makes me the person I am today. And I also believe, as I get older, I had more of a hard shell around myself. I think I've definitely softened up. I mean, you know me, I'm a giant marshmallow. But for people that maybe just meet me, I'm like an onion. It takes a couple layers because of the experiences I've had. And so any personality or profiling test, it'll come up where I have very low trust. Like, I don't trust anyone, right? But in the work that I'm in, I think you kind of have to do a trust but verify, as they say.
Didn't you conduct an exercise in one of my classes showing a white vehicle, like a white Chevy or something? Do you remember that?
Yes, true story.
And we had to determine how did that exercise go? What you were asking us to report to you what we saw, or what did we see when you throw up the picture?
Yep. Oh, you have a good memory. Yeah. So I had a Chevy Malibu,
that's right?
A 4-door Chevy Malibu, and I put it on the screen, and I went around to your class, and I said, okay, what do you see? And people are raising their hands, like, it's a white car, it's a Chevy, I said, okay, anything else? No, I don't know. I said, it's a 4-door Chevy Malibu. It's one of the cars that is the most popular in rental communities, with priests, law enforcement, and also on military bases. Typically they're black, but it's something that's familiar to all of these different institutions. So what does that tell me? Someone who's getting out of the military, they typically choose a car or a truck that is familiar to them. So it's either like a Ford 150, or, and then they obviously jack it up, or with the big tires, if you're on the operator side and get the lift, or a lot of times you see people like, well, it's just easy, I'll get the Chevy Malibu. It's a very vanilla type car, and no judgment, it's just, that's what it is. It's got the 4 doors, it's safe, it's got a good safety rating, no bells and whistles, here it is. So the backstory on that is then I showed the license plate, and the license plate was "Don't tread on me."
Yeah, and this was something that you observed at home, if I recall, and that led to the rest of the story. Oh, okay.
So people always ask, Kelley, is it hard when, like, from a profiling standpoint, do you ever take it home with you? I said, well, you have to. Yeah, I don't want to lie and say I'm always like
You
analyzing.
profile everybody.
Yeah, I was like, because my husband gets mad at me. He's like, oh, are you analyzing me right now? And one of the things I say, it's very tough to turn off, but I do typically in most like relational type pieces. However, when it comes to my kids, like the gloves come off. Yeah. And so for me, it's very normal to like go into a parking lot and just memorize all of the, you know, license plates and cars and makes and models. To me, that's like normal. That's not weird. So when my kids were at a specific daycare, I noticed that there was a car that didn't match any of the things that I had recalled before. And it was a white Chevy Malibu, which is fine, but it had a license plate on it that said, you know, "Don't tread on me." And it was the Semper Fi. It's a Marine.
Semper Fi.
Yeah, Semper Fi. And that's something that's very specific to, you know, military, former military, type A, alpha males, in your face. It just didn't match up with a white Chevy Malibu. So when people ask about profiling, I said 90% of it is gut. And you can read all of the textbooks that you want, but really 90% of it is something just seems a little bit off. And so I remember going into the school and saying, hey, do you have a male between the ages of like 52 to 60, bald, 6'2", recently working here? And the woman's face just went like white. And she goes, yeah, we just hired a chef, a cook in the kitchen. I said, okay, I'm going to give you less than 24 hours to do more background checks on him, and then I'm going to get involved. Well, I didn't really give her that much time to do it. But anyway, he ended up being a registered sex offender. And people say, Kelley, how would you get all of that from a car? Well, there's different pieces to that, though, John. So people would say, how did you know he was 6'2"? By the way that the seat
was in...
Exactly. The seat was pushed all the way back, and it was slumped all the way, reclined back, so I knew his height. The hair, that was a guess, but typically you have criminals from a law and order, special victims unit standpoint, that criminals aren't the smartest people in the world. They think if they shave their hair, you're not going to get the DNA. So he had shaved his head, and so there was that. And then the age piece, for me, first of all, just kind of what he was driving, and then with the sticker, he also had a college sticker on the back, so I knew he was a little bit older, and so I took a guess on the age, but that's the type that would be interested in children of that kind of age group. And so that's just an example, that one that kind of bled into my private life.
Do people that drive 2007 Honda CRVs in blue have to worry?
Oh my gosh, total terrorist. Light up like a Christmas tree. Yep. Is that what you drive?
That's what I
drive. Oh
yeah,
my gosh. Yep. Arrest you on the spot. But you can tell a lot. People always say, don't judge a person by its car. I say don't judge a person, by their looks. But cars sometimes do actually,
they reflect a personality.
They really do. And, for example, I'll give my husband as an example. He's had like 6 Ford Explorers in the last, 25 years. He gets the same one. Sometimes he changes it up and gets maybe like a tan interior versus, the black or the gray. But that's really about it. But that explains really my husband. He is very analytical, methodical. He's a no-nonsense. He wants a reliable car, nothing flashy. Meantime, I change cars typically like every 3 years. I like something different depending on kind of my life circumstance, whether it's a big truck or then all of a sudden I have kids and now I'm in this lame, minivan, but I actually secretly love it. So all of those different things play into it.
Kelley, how did you come upon this little school, this gem, this elite school of statecraft and national security affairs called the Institute of World Politics, for which you serve as a vice chairman of the board of advisors and now a faculty member? Tell us a little bit about that story.
It's a really interesting story. I'm glad that you asked me about this. So Just as a background, I've always admired IWP from afar. And what I mean by that is that I've worked with a lot of people, and when I'd say, oh, where did you go to school? And all of a sudden I realized that IWP graduates are sprinkled all throughout the intelligence community, State Department. I mean, they really are in very high level positions within the government. And I was like, I need to find out more about this school. And so I really just admired it from afar and started to, meet with the dean and then with the president at the time and saying I'd like to get more involved and know about the school. And at that same time, I had recently met my husband. We were dating. And he goes, hey, Kelley, like, I really want to take you to this reception at this school. My uncle, Bill Casey, and so Bill Casey was the director of CIA under Ronald Reagan's administration. And so my husband, who is not involved in the intelligence community whatsoever, he goes, yeah, like, why don't you come down and be part of this? And then there's going to be a deal at Langley at headquarters. And I said, oh, you go ahead. You go right ahead. But it was really kind of serendipitous, the whole thing of us kind of syncing up and becoming a part of it. And I remember meeting, with leadership, and they said, would you like to be on the board? And John, I think if you are in a position to give back, and so obviously I'm not independently wealthy, however, my currency and what I tell students is my time. And I said, I can't really give money per se. I said, but I will give my time, and I am definitely a roll up your sleeves type board member. I think, if you're going to be on a board, make sure it's a board that the mission you're passionate about, that you can give back something, and then also selfishly that you get something back that. And so for me, it brings me a lot of like joy and happiness and fulfillment in seeing these young students, right? Like going out into the world after leaving IWP. You walk through the halls here and there's just such a sense of excitement. No one's jaded yet by the world outside. They're so excited about the academic side, but also ready to be deployed at a moment's notice, excited to work at the Pentagon or State Department, and just the connections and the network that IWP has created. But what I also love is that they've kept it very, very under the radar for all of these years. And that's something I don't think is easy to do, knowing where their students end up. And I think it's a really beautiful thing is that we do keep a low profile at IWP for a reason, because of, what we're feeding into within the government and the private sector space, specifically with sensitive areas of national security.
You're also on the board of the Spy Museum, are you not?
I am. I just found out last week, so I'm very, very excited. This has been a dream of mine, John, since the new International Spy Museum opened up about 8 years ago. And so I went to the opening night with my husband and some colleagues. What's really fascinating about the Spy Museum is that it's a whole underground network. So all the former directors of the agency are involved and in on boards there. There are tech titans that are on the board, the AT&Ts, the Carasofts, the Booz Allens. And so it's really an amazing group of individuals that just want to give back. And I went through over a dozen interviews over a year just to be able to go on the board and be considered, but it was 8 years in the making. And so this is just a dream of mine. Someone asked, like, why would you want to be part of the Spy Museum? I said, oh my gosh, what a way to give back. What a way to take my 3 kids and walk them through a museum and be able to show them pieces of history that maybe or maybe not their mommy was a part of. And so I just think...
So this is the lioness returning to her den.
Yes, this is the lioness. So if they ever do anything on X-Files, I just think it's such a beautiful thing to be able to describe in a place where our successes are never highlighted, but our failures are on center stage. I think it's so important to learn and see as much as they can that Spy Museum, it's storytelling. And I really believe in storytelling. Mm-hmm. And it's telling the people, that come through those doors what the Spy Museum is all about and that education piece. And so to me, I just couldn't be happier.
That's
so
great.
I always tell people, again, if you're going to be on boards, make sure you can give 100%. One other board that I'm on, which I'm really passionate about, and it serves what we call the shadow warriors. Mm-hmm. And these are operators specifically operating within the intelligence community, think more on the paramilitary side. And it's a fairly new nonprofit, and it's called the Operator Relief Fund. And what we do here is we go in, and there's cutting edge medical interventions that are taking place that we provide, cover all of the costs, including also a holistic approach, so cognitive behavioral therapies, retreats for your spouses. Because John, when you
have PTSD as well.
PTSD and anxiety, and that's the big focus.
Yeah.
And that, I think, with my psych background, that's a really big piece that we really haven't dove into that yet from the community side in the intel piece, is that there is anxiety, there is PTSD. We kind of put it under the rug, and this nonprofit is coming in very discreetly and taking care of these individuals. And so we're just starting it off, but I'm really excited to be a part of it.
Well, Kelley DeConciliis, you are amazing. You are a rock star. You have a tremendously interesting background that I think is inspirational to men and women. I am honored to consider you my BFF, definitely my colleague now, teaching here at IWP, and I can only wish you the very best. And I encourage students to follow you very closely, because you are really an amazing young woman.
Oh, well, thank you, John.
And not an intern.
And not an intern. Well, thank you so much for having me on. This was so fun.
Thank you.
If you like our podcast and would like to hear more, please subscribe. And if you are interested in learning more about the topics we covered here today and want to be a student at IWP, go to iwp.edu and click Apply Now.